Life in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692 consisted of community, religion, and God. In the opening scene of the play, Reverend Paris is praying for his daughter Betty, whose right to movement was arrogated from her, and she is lying in bed unresponsive but alive. Reverend Paris's insatiable thirst for power causes him to think that his court members should not do anything without his word. Rumor is that Betty is suffering as a victim of witchcraft. Desperate, Paris calls for help, Reverend Hale, whom is an expert on witchcraft. Hale's job is to determine if Betty is bewitched. Before this, Paris witnessed Betty, Abigail Williams, and other girls dancing with Tituba, a slave from Barbados, in the middle of the night. Tituba was moving her hands in an undulating movement over the fire. With this knowledge, Paris immediately accosts Abigail to see if she has anything to do with the health of Betty. Paris's biggest worry is being removed from his office. Abigail's name is not of the highest quality after working with the Proctors. Elizabeth Proctor fired Abigail after finding out that she had relations with Elizabeth's husband, John Proctor. The Putnams enter the bedroom, and Mrs. Putnam is convinced that witchery is occurring in the town because all 7 of her babies died within a day of their birth, and that someone used witchcraft to murder them. Mary Warren, the current servant of Proctor, enters the scene and is scared that they will be labeled as witches. At this point, Betty gets up suddenly and yells for her mother. Betty then yells that Abigail didn't tell Paris about the blood-drinking charm to kill Elizabeth Proctor. After Abigail summarily proceeds to slap Betty across the face, who then returns to her unmoving and unresponsive state.
Mary is caught going to the witch trials. When she gets back to Proctor's house, Proctor forbade her from leaving the house and then threatens to whip her. After a church meeting, Abigail flirts with Proctor, and again he puts her down. Paris and Giles argue as to whether or not Paris should be given 6 pounds of firewood. It also becomes evident that the relationship between Putnam and Proctor is bitter when they begin to argue over ownership of a piece of timberland.
Reverend Hale enters the scene and questions Abigail about the forest. Giles asks Hale what reading strange books meant because he found Martha, his wife, doing so. He claimed he could not pray while the books were open. Hale questions Abigail about the dancing in the forest, but Abigail insists it was not connected to witchcraft. Paris says that Abigail drank some type of soup and a frog jumped in, therefore she was drinking blood. Abigail accused Tituba, saying that the devil made her drink it. Then the girls proceed to accuse those who they dislike of being witches.
Mary Warren is now at the witch trials, disobeying the orders of the Proctors. There are a total of 14 people who are in jail, and if they who have been accused don't confess, they will be hanged. Elizabeth at this point wants Proctor to testify against Abigail's accusations, since Proctor is deranged that the dancing in the forest had nothing to do with witchcraft. Proctor pleads that he cannot, since she told him while they were in a room alone. Elizabeth's myopic view of Proctor's faith causes her to judge him for being alone with Abigail. Proctor then insists that she needs to stop accusing him of things that did not happen.
When Mary arrives back home, she hands Elizabeth a doll she sewed in court as a gift. She tells them that 39 people have been accused. John argues that Mary should no longer attend the trials. Out of overt anger, John threatened to whip her, and in order to eschew the whipping, Mary blurts out that Elizabeth's name was mentioned in the accusations. But Mary stood up for her. Mary leaves the scene to go to bed, and John demands her to.
Hale goes to all those whose names were mentioned in court. When he arrives, he begins to ask John Proctor why he hasn't been to church in a while. Proctor responds by saying that he didn't like how Reverend Hale always preached about hell. Hale criticized Proctor for not having one of his sons baptized. Hale then proceeds to ask Proctor to recite the 10 Commandments. He only recites 9, forgetting the one pertaining to adultery.
With Elizabeth's demanding ways, Proctor tells Hale that the children's health had nothing to do with the witchcraft. Hale insists that it does because many had confessed. Proctor points out the fact that they would have been hanged if they did not. Giles and Frances come into the Proctor's home and say that their wives have been arrested. Rebecca was charged with the murder of the Putnam's babies, and Martha Corey is said to have bewitched a pig which died after it was sold to the man who bought the pigs from her.
The town marshals Cheever and Herrick arrived with a warrant for Elizabeth's arrest. Cheever asks if Elizabeth has any talisman objects, such as a poppet. When she replies she didn't have any since she was a girl, Cheever then spots the doll from Mary Warren and notices that it has a needle inside of it. Cheever then relates the needle to Abigail and how she had a tantrum at dinner at the Paris' home. Paris then finds the needle in Abigail's stomach, like the one in the poppet. Elizabeth calls for Mary, who tells Cheever that she made the poppet in court and stuck the needle into the doll herself.
Elizabeth is taken away and Proctor's anger gets the best of him and rips up her warrant. Proctor asks Hale why those who are accused are always assumed to be guilty. At this point, Hale questions the accusations. Proctor tells Mary to testify in court and tell the truth about the needle. Mary says that Abigail already displayed her nefarious personality by threatening to kill her if she told the truth and went against her, and also says that Proctor doesn't have to worry because Abigail will only charge him with lechery.
It is back in the vestry room of the Salem Meeting House, and Judge Hathorne is questioning Martha Corey under the suspicion of witchcraft. She denies his claim, then Giles interrupts the court session, explaining how he is able to substantiate his wife's innocence. Danforth gestures Giles to leave, while Francis Nurse enters and explains that he too has evidence to prove Rebecca's innocence. Proctor and Mary Warren come to the room, and they explain to Danforth that she never saw spirits and the other girls are pretending, and assembling the fact that they are not actually under the power of evil spirits. Danforth then asks Proctor if he is trying to undermine the court, but Proctor guarantees that he only wants to free Elizabeth. Cheever interrupts and notifies Danforth that Proctor ripped up Elizabeth's warrant, and Paris states that he only attends church once a month and plows on Sunday, which is a serious offense in Salem. Danforth is interested in this information and questions his religious beliefs and his act of sacrilege.
Danforth and Hathorne explain to Proctor that his wife is saved for at least another year because she claims to be pregnant. Even though he is given this information, Proctor refuses to drop his charges. Proctor brings forth a deposition signed by 91 farmers explaining Elizabeth, Rebecca, and Martha's good character. Paris believes that this is an act upon the court and wants them under further questioning. Hale exclaims that not every defense is an attack on the court, which is unwanted for his character because before he accused many people of witchcraft.
Putnam enters the room because of allegations by Giles. Giles says that Putnam triggered his daughter to accuse George Jacobs of witchcraft, and if he hangs, then Putnam will be the only person to afford to purchase Jacobs' land. Giles refuses to give the name of the man who provided him this information because it may emulate what happened to Martha when he brought up her name about the books. Danforth has Giles arrested for contempt of the court.
Danforth asks for Abigail and the rest of the girls and asks if there's any truth to Mary's testimony. Abigail denies it, but Mary is still firm that the girls are still pretending. Hathorne wants her to pretend to faint, but she says she cannot because she does not have the sense of it. Mary says that she only pretended to faint because she only thought she saw spirits. Danforth pressures Abigail and the girls to tell the truth, but they continue to accuse Mary and start acting as if Mary is bewitching them.
Proctor interrupts, grabs Abigail by her hair, and calls her a whore. He confesses to his crime of adultery and explains that Elizabeth fired her when she assumed that he did. He tells the court that Abigail wants Elizabeth dead so that she can take her place. Danforth sends for Elizabeth and asks her why she fired Abigail. Elizabeth lies and says that she fired her because she thought Proctor fancied her, so she lost her temper and fired her. Although she thinks this will help Proctor, it led to a pejorative situation, making Proctor's stance worse. Herrick leads Elizabeth out of the room, and Proctor exclaims that he has already confessed, but he knows it's too late for Elizabeth to change her story. Abigail and his girls start screaming and ask Mary to stop sending spirits upon them. Mary wants them to stop, but the room enters complete maelstrom. With this overwhelming chaos, Mary accuses Proctor of working with the devil and pressuring her into joining his ways. Proctor is then arrested, and Hale, baffled by the scene, announces that he is quitting the court.
It is now fall of that year, and Danforth and Hathorne visit the Salem jail to talk to Paris. They want to know why Hale returned to Salem. Paris explains that he wants to convince the prisoners to confess in order to save themselves. Paris brings up news that Abigail and Mercy ran away with all of his money. When Hale enters, he begs Danforth to pardon the prisoners and postpone the hangings. With Danforth's intransigent nature, he refuses and says that doing so will look bad upon himself in the court.
Danforth wants Elizabeth to speak with Proctor to try to convince him to confess. When Elizabeth and Proctor meet, they speak about the outcome of Giles Corey, and Proctor asks if he should confess. Elizabeth explains to him that any animadversion from her will not bring goodness to him, but his own critique and forgiveness of himself will. Proctor decides to confess, and Hathorne and Danforth order Cheever to bring a pen and paper to write the confession. Proctor asks why his confession has to be written down, and Danforth responds, explaining that it will be hung on the church door. Rebecca Nurse is brought in as a witness, and Danforth goes through a list of names and asks Proctor if he saw any of them working with the devil. Proctor denies it all because he only wants to speak for his own sins.
Proctor signs the confession but quickly rips it up. He wants to keep his good name and refuses to let his name be posted on the church door. Hale and Paris plead for Elizabeth to decry Proctor, but she refuses to devalue him from doing what he knows is right.